Good morning, Geek Week 7. It's Monday. Good morning.
Good morning, Geek Week 7. It's Monday, and I apologise firstly for not making a video last week and subsequently not knowing what week we're on. So I'm gonna assume it's Speciality Week, but I'll just let you know what's going on at the same time. So I've been borrowing my friend's Xbox 360 and playing Grand Theft Auto 5 and FIFA 13 as Swindon Town, and that's kind of why I've been busy and why I didn't make a video last Monday. So yeah, that's what's going on with me. I got next week off because it's half term or end of term depending on which way you look at it, so I get a week off, unpaid, but a week off, which is nice. So this is my music segment. Beautiful transition. So the musical segment today, I'm going to talk about record contracts. Hooray! I was inspired after watching the explanation we got about what's happening with the American shutdown of the government and the only way to end it and why you couldn't do it for other means. Very interesting. So I thought I'd share with you my only legal bit of knowledge, which is about record contracts. Specifically major record contracts. With independent labels, they vary quite a lot, and you've got to be careful because you might think it's an independent, but it's not. It'll be a subsidiary. So even though it's got its own name as a record company, they're owned by a major record company. For example, the guy who did talent shows in the UK, Simon someone, who used to be like, oh, I'm all angry and I think you're rubbish, when he used to make Teletubbies records. He runs a subsidiary for Sony. So he has his own record company, but it's owned by Sony. So it's just a way of differentiating which record labels put out what kinds of music, so people will think that, like, you know, that record company name, they deal with that, like, with that particular genre. Whereas it obviously they're all separately linked by this giant multinational record company at the top, one of the major three. I think there used to be four, but one of them consolidated, so there's three. There's EMI, Sony, and I think it's Universal. I think those are the major three. I might be wrong, it's been a while since I was studying this. So yeah, it turns out you get a record contract with them, and there's basically all the clauses that will absolutely make it a horrible contract to be a part of. I'll just like list a few now. So number one, they take 90%. It's usually between 88 and 92, but let's say 90% because that keeps the math simple. 90% of the money for every record sold, after all the exclusions such as, you know, warehouse costs and manufacturing. The profit, 90% goes to them. 10% will go to the artist, which we'll call you for now because that makes it simple. So they get 90%, you get 10. Now, you get your 10% once you've recouped the costs of making the album. So all the album recoup costs come out of your cut. So the record company, the first CD that gets sold or the first download that gets sold, they get 90%. Now what they also get is they get your 10% to recoup the money they spent making your album. So let's say they gave you an advance of, let's say, £1 million. I'm saying pounds, calling the UK. Just call it dollars and think of it that way. So £1 million. So they spent £1 million. Now that means that if your album is selling for, say, £10, right, and let's say £5 of that is recoupable, so that means you need to sell a total of 10 million units to pay it back, right? No, 20 million units. Should have worked out the math first. But basically, yeah, 20 million units, something around that mark, until you have paid back the costs of making the album. And then you start making 10% off each sale, which in that case would be 50p every album sold. So, but by this point, of course, the record company has made millions and millions and millions of pounds, and the thing is, it's not just your advance that you're paying back. It's also all the money it takes to make the music videos. That comes out of your budget. All the studio time, the cost for the producer and the mixing and the mastering. You've also got the costs for advertising. And of course, if it's a major release, the amount of advertising they put into that is ridiculous. The amount of money they spend getting your music video to pop up while someone's watching a video on YouTube, or to run like print or television, or I believe they still use this thing called radio. But yeah, radio ads. All that comes out of your budget. So it's going to be a long time before you make any money. And another clause in there, which I'm going to make, there's going to be only 2 clauses because this is running late already. The other clause that really can screw you over is at any time the record company can say that you've not provided them with the right kind of material, and they basically get to dictate what kind of music you're making. We need your music to appeal to this demographic, so we need you to make music that's a bit more like this. And even if you get a full album together, they can just reject the album. But at the same time, you're not allowed to release any music through any other means. And all the material that you've recorded with them, even the stuff that they didn't want on the album, that belongs their property. And the album can just be shelved. They can just say, okay, it's just, we've got it all finished and ready to go, but we just don't want to release it. And there's been plenty of albums and artists that have had this happen to them. They signed up their very first album, and that's it. It's shelved, it's not released, but you're still tied into the contract. So you can't go making music elsewhere. And usually the time lapse on these are pretty huge. You're talking like 8 to 10 years before you're allowed to start making music again. And of course, in music, 8 to 10 years from, you might have had like an underground hit, and then you get signed to a major, but no music comes out from that. Then 8 to 10 years later, you release another song. It's quite hard to have people that are going to have that kind of memory to invest in an artist in that way, that they can, make one song that you might have heard, or one demo, and then that's it. You just don't hear from them again for 8 to 10 years. It'll kill your career. And basically, these are the things that everyone's supposed to be, trying their hardest to go and get. If you're a musician, you're like, oh, I need to get a record contract, but it's devilish. So and of course the problem is, you sign up with a real independent, they don't really have the way of marketing you or any of the finances behind it to do that. I think with clever marketing you can still get around that. I mean, nowadays with the internet, you can very carefully directly target your demographics. So rather than aiming for a wide audience and getting a small retention, you can aim for quite a small audience and get quite a big retention from it. So I think really that's kind of the truth behind it. But then everything that gets involved in pop culture, that's all through majors. You can't get anything in pop culture that isn't through a major. I mean, even the biggest example is, not personally my taste, but Macklemore. He was one of the recent major examples in American music of where someone wasn't signed to a major record label but still had a song that was in the top charts and was being interviewed on television and stuff, and was generally acknowledged as a musical artist. However, he did distribute his music through Sony. I think it was Sony. It was definitely one of the major 3s. So even to get to that level as an independent, you have to go through them at some point, because they've got all the biggest ties with advertising, they've got all the biggest ties with distribution. It's really difficult. So yeah, that's why you don't really hear that much varied music, and that's why when people sign to major record labels, their first release usually is really poppy, and it usually continues that way. It's more to do with the fact that it's either that or you just don't make music for 10 years. So best advice, don't sign. Just make your music by yourself for as cheaply as possible and distribute it online for free, and at least your actual expression will be out there rather than some kind of watered down to fit as big a demographic as possible music. which is the alternative. So that's why I make my music at home using my horribly lo-fi tech setup, but loving it. These endings are getting so awkward.